My 6-year-old daughter, Jane, has recently started to enjoy playing hide and seek. At first, I thought it was cute. Jane had always enjoyed games like this, so I didn't think much of it. I figured that it was something she had played at school and thought she'd be bored of it by the end of the week. Kids are always finding new ways to entertain themselves, so it wasn't unusual when she started asking to play. I thought that it was something fun that we could do together, and I wanted to promote her creativity. It wouldn't take me long to find her anyway, as she was notorious for attempting to hide in plain sight. Jane really liked hide and seek, though, and never seemed to get weary of it. So, for the next 2 months, it became sort of routine. Aside from the longevity, it was nothing to be concerned about. That was until today, when I came home from work. I walked in through our garage and saw our nanny, Sue, frantic that she couldn't find Jane. Of course, this panicked me, so I asked Sue when she last saw Jane. She told me that Jane had wanted to play hide and seek, like usual, so she turned her back and counted to 10 while Jane hid. When she turned around, Jane was gone. Sue said she looked under the couch, in the bedrooms, and under the beds, behind doors, and multiple other places. This went on for almost 30 minutes, and she still couldn't find her. Sue then told me that she had called out to Jane, telling her she wins and to come out from her hiding spot, but Jane never came out. So, thinking that Jane hadn't heard her, she continued to look and call her name. After an hour had passed, though, Sue began to panic. She ran throughout the house, yelling for Jane and telling her it wasn't funny anymore. No response. I even asked Sue if she had possibly heard movement or giggling, something to give away Jane's hiding spot, but she said no. At this point, Sue was in tears, profusely apologizing and practically gagging on her words. I felt awful that my daughter had done this. She had never misbehaved in this way, and she loved Sue too much to make her worry. So I gathered my composure and assured her that Jane had to be in the house. She's too short to unlock the doors to go outside, and told her we could look together. We must have looked for hours, in and under every place a child could hide or fit, when I finally remembered a spot that Sue would never think to look. It was Jane's closet, in the far back behind the clothes. In the bottom right corner, there was a little door that had once been used as a dumbwaiter. I forgot that it even existed, but I rushed to Sue and told her, gasping between words. We ran to Jane's room and frantically pulled the closet door open, almost taking it off its hinges. I dropped to my knees, shoved a mound of clothes to the right, and there it was. Right in front of us was the door to the dumbwaiter. It was painted over with a coat of white paint, but you could still see the dark outline square in the wall. The silence between Sue and I was deafening. I knew we were both fearing the worst. I called out to Jane, told her that it was time to stop hiding now, but there was no response. I slowly reached for the handle, my heart beating so loud I could hear it in my ears, and slid the door open. Inside was Jane, but it was a horrifying discovery. Her body was contorted and mangled, her knees each bent at a 90-degree angle so her feet touched the top of the dumbwaiter, her arms twisted grotesquely between them. Her long hair fell around her face and body, only her eyes visible through the strands, and her fingernails were bleeding from digging them into the wood. Sue and I fell back in sync with each other, terrified, unable to grasp what we were witnessing. After a moment, Sue said that she must have been in shock, possibly from broken bones, so she began to stand up to call an ambulance. It was then, when Sue moved, that Jane started to scream. It was a shrill, animalistic scream, like a deer that's been hit by a car and left to die. Despite this, Sue managed to stand up and find her cell phone to call an ambulance. It wasn't until she returned that the screaming stopped. I thought that maybe Jane had passed out from the pain, so I slowly scooted my way towards her. I must have only moved a few inches when I saw her eyes locked on me, unblinking and glazed over. I called her name gently, but something inside of me told me not to go near her. I wanted to console her, but I was scared of her. I was scared of my own daughter. It must have been about 5 minutes before I heard the sound of the ambulance outside the house. Flashes of red shined through the window of Jane's room, and a wave of relief washed over me. I looked back over at Jane, but instead saw the door of the dumbwaiter closing and the top of Jane's head going down. I jumped towards it and managed to stop it at the last second, my hand between the door and the inside of the dumbwaiter. I yelled to Sue to go downstairs and get the medics when a sharp pain suddenly shot through my index finger. I screamed and pulled my hand away, a trail of blood flowing on the floor. I then watched as the dumbwaiter door closed and could hear Jane giggling as she was being lowered down. But I had soon forgotten about that, as the agonizing pain in my finger quickly became unbearable. I brought my hand up slowly to where I could see it and unwrapped my other hand from it. I almost passed out from the sight. Half of my index finger had been reduced to a stub. It had been bitten off right at the joint. I felt the blood swelling up inside, throbbing against the skin. I then heard Sue coming running in, alerting the medics down the hall to come quickly. I tried to tell her about Jane, to tell the medics to check the basement for her, but I could barely get my first word out before everything went dark. I don't remember much after that, only that I woke up in the hospital, which is where I am now. The police came and went about an hour ago. They questioned Sue and I separately, then told me that the only evidence they'd found was a broken window in the basement, my blood on the bedroom floor, and the other half of my finger in the dumbwaiter. No sign of Jane in the house or outside, even with the help of police dogs. So, as of right now, she's been marked as a missing person. I could tell by their tone that they're not too hopeful of finding her, but I know she's out there somewhere. That simple thought alone terrifies me, and I can't stop myself from thinking that this is still a game of hide and seek to her, a bigger one, with more people to play. So if you see her, maybe in the woods or in your house somewhere, take my warning. Don't play hide and seek with her.
My son James has always had a hard time making friends. He just finished the 2nd grade, and I was beginning to think that he might never really have a good friend. Then on the first day of summer, he proudly announced that the next-door neighbor's son, Henry, wanted to play hide and seek. I called his mom to make sure that was okay, and we set up a play date. We are in a small neighborhood, and I didn't see the harm, but she was hesitant. I explained to her that James was very shy, so the fact that he made a friend at all was really a miracle. I don't want to mess this up, I told her. She reluctantly agreed. I told James that we would go over to let them play the very next day. He was so excited that he finally had a friend. He was grinning ear to ear. The boys ran across the street to the small playground and began to play as I got to know Henry's mom. I'm sorry this is the first time we've made introductions, I told her. She claimed it was fine. She was constantly on her phone texting someone. I got the impression her mind was occupied. So do you and your husband have any plans next weekend? I asked. I wanted to try to keep things between Henry and James as easy as possible by being friendly. But she simply frowned and said, I don't think we will be doing this again. I wasn't sure why she had such a cold demeanor, and before I could ask if I said something wrong, she called her son and they left. I stood up and shouted for James, but he didn't reply. He must still be hiding, I thought as I walked over to the playground and started to play along. Come on, bud, we have to shower and then get ready for dinner, I told him. Still no response. I knelt down and looked in the long pipe that ran through the playground to see if he was in there, but all I saw was empty void. I began to panic, shouting for him to respond to me, but my son didn't even make a peep. I called my husband Joseph and told him the situation. Beth, calm down. Go ask that neighbor kid if he knows where James would hide. It's probably just a case of our kid finding a really good hiding spot. He probably can't hear you because he left the playground. I was thankful he was managing to keep a level head. I went over to Henry's house and knocked on the door. His mother seemed irritated that I was there. What is it now? She snapped. Again, she was on the phone, texting away without even looking at me. I'm sorry to bother you, but while Henry and James were playing, I guess James thought that the game was still going on when your son left. He's hiding somewhere nearby and I can't find him, I said. So? What does that have to do with us? She asked. Does Henry have any idea where James might have gone?" She glared at me. "Are you accusing my son of something? If you can't find your kid, that's your fault. Now get off my porch before I call the police." I was flabbergasted by this behavior, and I did call the police, but for an entirely different reason. When they arrived, I told them the situation with my son, and I was trying my best to not sound like an overworked and stressed out mother. They canvassed the park, but couldn't find my son anywhere. When Joseph got home, I told him about the neighbor, and he became suspicious. They've been here for almost 5 years, and I don't recall any neighbor with a kid named Henry. "Something is up," he told me. He said he would go over to talk with the mom about it. An hour passed, and he hadn't returned home, and I was beginning to feel uneasy again. It was nearly sunset. I walked over to the house and knocked on the door. The mother opened it, as usual, glued to her phone. Something snapped inside me, and I pushed the cell phone from her hands, forcing her to look at me. "My husband came over here to talk to you. Where is he now?" I asked angrily. She seemed to be amused by my rage. "Probably out playing hide and seek with your son," she laughed. "Give me back my phone now." "What could possibly be so important that you don't give two flips about other people?" I asked as I glanced at the messages she was sending. My heart dropped as I read them. "First package sent. Second package for you, unexpected. Pay for both and will release confirmation of assets." Below that were pictures of my son and my husband being held somewhere, tied down with ropes and tape on their mouths. "Jesus Christ," I said as I took a step back. My neighbor jumped me, and we fell into the street. I screamed at the top of my lungs, punching them and scratching at their eyes. I grabbed the phone and ran toward the playground. I texted whoever they were contacting, demanding that my family be released. My neighbor was about to throttle me again when I found a metal pipe and slammed it against the side of her head, knocking her unconscious. To show how serious I was to these kidnappers, I sent a picture of my neighbor. "I'll turn all this evidence over to the police, but if you let me have my family back, I won't say a thing," I told whoever was on the other end of the phone. At last, that got a response. "How about another game?" My heart sank. I dared to ask what game they wanted to play. Of course, it was hide and seek. "You hide." Then to my shock, a bullet zipped past my head. I ran into the neighbor's house and slammed the door closed as more bullets were shot into the house. I was sure other neighbors would surely call the police, but instead I was attacked for the next 10 minutes as I tried to hide in the house. More gunfire erupted as I passed by windows and ran upstairs. Her son was asleep, clearly unaware of whatever dirty job his mother was involved with. I decided to make a counteroffer to the kidnappers, sending a picture of her son. "Is this boy an asset for you? Do you use him to target other children? I will get him to the police unless you give my family back." 2 seconds later, the gunfire stopped. Then they texted back, "Find your family in the house in 2 minutes." I screamed out my husband's name, but no reply came. Then my neighbor appeared at the door as I went to the first floor. She was covered in blood, but clearly panicking. "This isn't what was supposed to happen. You have to let me get to my son," she begged. I stood in front of the stairs, feeling nothing but anger toward her. "You kidnapped a kid and forced him to play a game with other children just to sell them to human trafficking, and now you want me to believe you care?" I shouted. Her fake concern faded as soon as she realized I knew the truth. Then she screamed and pushed herself on top of me, tackling me at the bottom of the stairs as I heard a countdown on the phone get closer to 0. "You have no idea how hard it's been for me. This is all I know. These people are ruthless," she shrieked. I used the phone to jab her throat and raced toward the back of the house. I found a basement stairwell and heard muffled screams. At the bottom, I found my family and hurriedly untied them. As we got ready to leave, the basement door closed and locked. Then a voice on the phone gave new information. "Someone in your life cares about you enough to come find you. They will play our game of hide and seek, or we will kill you. Choose who will be our next victim, and then you can live a little longer." Joseph kept telling me not to listen to the threat, but all I could think about was James. I chose my cousin. We were there for a day with no food and no water. Henry and the woman who claimed to be his mother disappeared, likely moving to another town to con other people. We were rescued because my cousin worked for the FBI. There's still a lot I don't know, like why these people were obsessed with a children's game or why they used other kids to get what they wanted. Our bank account was drained, of course. Our house was raided. We reported all of it, but I don't think the true culprits were ever caught. We keep to ourselves now, and James hardly ever tries to make friends. And when he does, he never plays hide and seek.